Okay, well, why don't we go ahead and get started? I see from the questions that clearly when we're using Microsoft captioning, you can see what we're talking about before the webinar starts. So now that you all know that I got a haircut, that's a good place to start. Thank you for joining us for Equity in the Classroom, ensuring that open educational resources, or otherwise known as OER, are accessible to everyone. Hope you all are having a good week and a great afternoon or morning, depending on where you're joining us from. To get started, we'll do a little bit of housekeeping as soon as my clicker starts to work. There we go. So thank you for joining us to celebrate Global Accessibility Awareness Day 2020. This is Red Shelf's third annual Global Accessibility Awareness Day webinar, where we focus on accessibility in higher ed, mostly around the accessibility of course materials. It's usually been our theme. We chose this theme this year basically in partnership with the DAISY Consortium, who is really looking into the accessibility of OER to make sure that it is an equitable choice for all students. So we really kind of wanted to dig into this issue to partner with them on this to increase awareness of accessibility or inaccessibility of OER. We do encourage your questions via the questions tab in the GoToMeeting dashboard. We'll be monitoring those and answering them at the end of the webinar. Anything we don't get to, we will certainly answer after the webinar and send you via email. So if you happen to have a question that you forget, or you have some sort of immediate question following the webinar, you can email me directly at erin@redshelf.com. It's nice to meet everyone. Some of you may have joined us for some of our past webinars, but if you haven't, welcome. I am Erin Lucas. I am the Senior Director of Digital Accessibility at Red Shelf. I have been with Red Shelf since 2017, so almost 3 years now. Prior to that, I spent 20 years in the federal sector doing design, software development, program management. The last 15 years of those, of that time span, I was at the DoD. I was ensuring Section 508 compliance for our software products. And I'm also a DHS certified trusted tester and an IAAP member. And like anyone else who's probably an IAAP member, while we're sheltered in place, I'm working on my accessibility certifications. A little bit about Red Shelf. So we are an ed tech company, and our focus is really on making education more affordable, more effective, and of course, more accessible. We distribute roughly 1 million titles from around 400 publishers to millions of students across the nation at about 2,000 campuses. We are also the most utilized inclusive access platform among independent bookstores. And if you're on a Follett campus, we are the primary digital provider for Follett managed stores. So students may not know when they're on a Follett campus that Red Shelf is the way that they're getting their books, but it is. They use our e-reader on a Follett campus. Our goals for today, we really want to explore the accessibility combined with the affordability of OER as part of everyone's digital strategy. We know changing times and fluctuating schedules and people not being on campus, that's more important than ever because everyone's strategy is changing. So we really need to understand how digital accessibility impacts OER and even faculty created course materials that could sometimes also be considered like an open resource. We want to discuss key roles in the adoption and creation of OER because that's really key in making sure that everyone is plugged into the process. It helps the assurance of accessibility and adopting accessible materials really work much more smoothly. So we'll also introduce some tools for creating and validating born accessible OER. We won't really dive too far into how to use them, but we wanted to introduce you to some tools that we use, that we know that our partners use, and have been successful for us and them. And we'll also help you identify sources of OER and some best practices around the creation of OER. So why OER? Why are we looking at OER? Well, like I mentioned, we are partnering with Daisy on this to raise awareness about making sure that OER is accessible, and we know that it's becoming more and more popular on a lot of campuses. So we talk about the whole state that we're in right now, the whole changing digital strategy. And millions of students have been impacted by not being able to be on campus or their campus going virtual. And that's just like 4,000 institutions and 25 million students. So it's a big impact. And really, taking a proactive approach prior to something like this happening really means that you are assuring accessibility for your students. But if you weren't super concerned with that, or it wasn't something you were treating proactively, you might be a little bit behind the 8 ball now. So it's kind of time to catch up. And we do know that the Department of Education did issue a warning in March that even if you have to move into distance learning and students are not on campus, ADA is not optional. It's still something that you have to comply with. So making sure that all of your course materials are accessible is a big part of that. One of the things that we like to do is talk about bridging the gap, especially with affordability and accessibility. So 7 in 10 students might not purchase a physical textbook because it's too expensive. So, we tackle the affordability angle there with digital textbooks. And then, of course, the same thing can be said for accessibility. Digital textbooks are often better for students with disabilities as long as they are accessible. It really enriches their learning experience. And while we know about 11% of undergraduates might qualify for assistance from an accessibility office, less than half of them actually register, whether that's they don't want to or they don't know how to, but it isn't all of them. And so making sure that your course materials are accessible, your experience is accessible using digital materials means that all students will benefit from that accessibility. So why don't we dig into OER 101, so Open Educational Resources 101. Maybe you're using it on your campus, maybe you're not, maybe you just kind of really just need to know what it is, what are we talking about, what are the advantages and what are the disadvantages. So essentially OER is defined as free and openly licensed educational materials. So you can use it for teaching, learning, research, and other purposes, essentially to allow you to engage in the 5 R's. So that's retaining, which means you can control a copy of the resource, you can own it, you can create OER yourself. Reuse, so you can take your original, revise it, remix it, make it available publicly. You can remix it, so you can take your OER, someone else's OER, put it together and make something brand new. And then redistributing it is a big part of that, right? You can share copies of your original stuff, your revised stuff with other people. And the fact that it's open and not restricted by IP or copyright allows you to share that and edit it in any way that you would like. Currently, when we talk about OER sort of in a more of a commercial sense, there's about 3 million students who are currently using OpenStax textbooks. So that is an OER textbook essentially created by an organization working with Rice University to make those available on reading platforms, say like Redshelf. And you could also pull them down yourself and apply those 5 R's there, reuse and remix and redistribute. But OER is really starting to grow, especially now. We're seeing a lot more demand for it, just kind of given the times. And there are many campuses that have mandates around affordability. So they will institute a particular percentage of OER that needs to be used on campus to try to make the students' experience more affordable. There are actually some campuses that have tried to pass an entire mandate for OER where all 100% of materials are OER, but that actually is in conflict with values of OER, which are deeply linked to that academic freedom piece. And the University of Hawaii system tried to go all OER, and faculty was not happy with that, and academic freedom was the reason. So they did roll that back, and we see less of that now, of that 100% mandate, and more of just a kind of a combination of OER and traditional publisher materials. So before we move forward and dig in a little bit deeper with OER, we wanted to run a quick poll and see who is actually using OER on their campuses right now. We'll just give it a couple of minutes. Okay, so it looks like about 35% of you are using it faculty by faculty, 5% on a campus-wide basis, and then 55% not sure. Okay. Well, hopefully that even if you are using it or you're not, you'll get enough information out of this webinar to understand what it is, and then even maybe bring the idea back to your campus if you're not using it. Close that window so I can do this. There we go. All right, so advantages of OER. So generally speaking, accessibility and OER being accessible is an advantage of OER. So if it's born accessible, it's friendly to assistive technologies, which means it reduces the need for accommodations, is usable by anyone. And it also removes those legal barriers around modifying content for a student, where in a traditional publisher sense, you might not have the permission to modify the content if you get an accommodation file from a publisher. OER sort of removes that barrier, right? So you can make changes to it or adapt it for your students' needs. Accessible OER can also be shared, again, that whole redistributing piece, across multiple institutions. So if you have something that you've remediated, you could potentially be keeping that and sharing that with others, maybe disability services offices, in case they need a similar resource. It's also scalable, easy to distribute widely with little or no cost. We often see OER as a supplement to publisher materials, so a way for faculty to sort of take their approach to maybe what they're using alongside of their textbook. It can also be used to reduce deficiencies, maybe where there isn't a lot of information, or for some sort of a custom class where maybe there's some level of textbook effort there, but maybe you need to kind of beef it up because it's maybe not a very well-known topic or something specific to a campus. We often see that in campuses that have a specific kind of focus. They might use OER along some other kind of material, or just OER alone. Again, you can customize it to your course, your campus, makes it really more flexible and more robust, better learning for most students. And then, of course, affordability is huge with OER. It can reduce costs for students significantly. And, in terms of students with disabilities, that's probably especially important for them, because they may have other financial burdens that make affordability extremely important for them. Some challenges around OER. Surprisingly, accessibility is also on this list. So there is plenty of OER out there that is not accessible. That includes, from faculty created, campus created materials, even some of the commercially available OER is not in a born accessible format. So it's really not accessible to students with disabilities who use assistive technologies. And another thing that's a barrier for OER that's inaccessible is it might create an additional burden for a DSO. If they have to remediate something that you have created, they're already very busy, so that's just one other thing that they have to do. So, making sure that you've created it in an accessible way will reduce that burden for them. Content quality can often be kind of poor. If you are remixing a whole bunch of different sources and you're not considering the quality of maybe say the photos that you're using, or if you have content that isn't actually text but it's photos of text, you've included some sort of media that maybe doesn't have captions, that, or it's even just poor quality, that can really affect how effective the materials are for a student. And then resources. If you're not lucky enough to be a campus that has instructional designers on staff that work to create OER materials, that pretty much means that you're creating it yourself. You're finding the resources, you're putting it all together, you're hopefully making sure it's accessible, and that takes time. So it definitely takes an added resource to create OER. You also have to make sure that you are not making open educational resources closed educational resources if you add anything to your OER that has a copyright, that has protected IP. So you have to be very careful to only add open things to OER. And then, of course, we caution against those strict mandates. It's great to have flexibility there because it really just works against academic freedom if there is no mandate. So what does it really take to ensure accessible OER on your campus? So really simply, it's three different things. It's influencers making accessible choices, and then those who are creating OER or bringing in OER, let's make sure that it's in an accessible format. And then finally, you can have the most accessible format and choices in the world. If you don't have accessible delivery, a way for that to be delivered to you accessibly and the student, then essentially that destroys the accessibility of the first two steps. So let's talk first about influencing accessible OER. What can you do to make sure that you are adopting the most accessible OER possible? So let's take another quick poll. This will be the last one, just the second one here. I'm curious to know of our participants today, what is your role on campus? Give it just another second. Okay. Well, I'm glad to see that we have some instructional designers, authors on today, and bookstore managers is like a good mix. That's great. Excellent. So we will cover all of these bases now. So who are the influencers we're going to kind of discuss today? Essentially, the influencers are almost exactly the same as adopting traditional publisher-created course materials. So we have professors and faculty, authors and designers, accessibility offices, and bookstore managers. Interestingly enough, OER seems to have been a kind of a hot topic since we chose to do this webinar, and I don't know if it's coincidence, but we seem to just be getting bombarded with all kinds of OER data. And as we were putting this slide deck together, we did get this via the College Store magazine. They did a study with faculty looking at where they needed support in terms of OER. And so we thought it would be interesting to include this here. So obviously we're talking specifically about faculty here, but their biggest concern was trying to find content. If they're creating their OER, where do they find all these things to put it all together? Some folks are a little bit unsure about what the rules are with OER and what the laws are. Help coordinating with DSOs. That's something that we always talk about, that whole, it takes a village to make all this stuff happen. Obtaining print versions. If you are working very closely with your bookstore, they may have a way to create a loose leaf version for you. But if you're talking about printing that kind of stuff on your own, or asking a student to print it, that could get kind of expensive. So I can see why that's a challenge. And then of course, personalizing the content and learning how to use it are also big on the list. Posting to the LMS, and then just some other, I guess, I don't know what falls into other, but 13% of people said other. So I think some of the tips that we have in here will be really helpful to answer some of these questions for you. So back to professors and faculty, how do you know that you are adopting accessible OER? Just asking a lot of questions, being able to, connect with other people on campus is a great way to start understanding the accessibility of OER, and just knowing that if you are making that effort to ensure that you're adopting things that are accessible, that's going to mean less requests for disability services offices, less accommodations, and again, that whole idea that all students can benefit. So, having a good relationship with your bookstore and a good relationship with your disability service office is key here. And again, if you're lucky enough to have someone on your campus that is an instructional designer, many of them are very well versed in all of the latest accessibility guidelines, and they can guide you. So it's really key to be connected to folks when you're creating your course materials, or even supplementing traditional publisher content, because oftentimes we see that a book from a publisher is accessible, it's more accessible in an EPUB format, and then students don't run into problems until they get into the supplemental materials and find out that they are not accessible. So making sure that they both are is very key here. So if you're an author or a designer, you need to be making sure that you are designing and creating materials for the widest possible audience. That will help you meet the needs of all learners. So, this basically applies across the board. If you're an instructional designer, that's pretty much your job, making sure that you're meeting all of those needs. And, most are considering the standards. You'll hear a lot about the Universal Design for Learning as a guiding framework. Knowing those accessibility standards, again, knowing where we are, that we're at WCAG 2.1, and the tools you can use to make sure that everything is accessible, and being able to test it for accessibility. And then the Quality Matters Higher Education rubric is really key for instructional courses. It's basically 8 different rules to ensure that you're making the best course that you can for students. And then, connecting with your campus accessibility office is a great resource for you if you're maybe struggling with accessibility. Maybe you're just getting started. They probably will have a lot of resources for you to, reach out to, or many campuses now have their own accessibility conferences. Michigan State's a really good example of that. They have all kinds of courses at their conference every year, which will probably be virtual this year, now that I think about it, for instructional designers especially. And of course, resources like CSUN and things like that. Accessibility offices. How closely are you working with other influencers? I know that we find often a lot that maybe many of these folks aren't really talking to each other when we go on campus. So we really try to, bring everybody to the table to say, hey, no matter what kind of materials you're using, OER or otherwise, Is everybody on the same page with accessibility? Are you finding, if you're using OER on your campus, that you are having to remediate it and then keep a library of accommodation files for OER? That's one thing that we hear that a lot of schools will, hold a repository of accommodation files. And if you are doing that, are you sharing that with other schools? If you are having trouble, say, getting an accommodation file for OER, we're a good resource for that, because a lot of our publishers allow us to provide accommodation files to you, and that includes in the realm of OER. And then just, connecting with your bookstore manager for adoptions. This is the time of the year where we're really starting to talk about what's happening in fall, what's being adopted for fall. So having that whole open communication and relying on each other to make sure that what's being adopted, again, OER or otherwise, is accessible. And then bookstore managers. I know a lot of bookstore managers have faculty that are using custom course materials. Don't be afraid to say to them, hey, listen, is this accessible? Or am I going to have a lot of students telling me that they can't use this because it's not accessible? And if they don't know the answer to that, this is where your relationship with the DSO comes in handy. You say, hey, just go talk to Megan and, find out how you can make your stuff accessible. If you have faculty that are requesting adoptions for commercial OER materials, the same thing applies. If you're concerned about the accessibility there, you can reach out to the folks who created it, if it's not something that maybe your campus is creating, but you should always try to make sure that you're asking the questions of anyone who's providing you course materials. And then, like I said, connect into your accessibility office. You want to make sure students all have a great experience, and having a good relationship with the accessibility office is a big part of that. Oftentimes you'll find that you might actually be doing the same work for students. We find that a lot, where there's duplication of efforts, and if you were collaborating, then you could maybe make better use of everybody's time, right? So creating accessible OER, few tips and tricks in that realm. Like we've been saying all along, like we always say, EPUB is born accessible. It's really your best format. It's digital content, essentially using the same technologies that build the web. So it has all of those, semantic standards, and you can easily make it accessible. It was developed for the digital publishing industry. It's compatible with assistive technologies, and it's reflowable. So that means doesn't matter what kind of screen you're using. So if you're on your laptop and you're on an iPad or on your iPhone, which students use all of those things, then it's easy to use, easy to see, easy to read, easy to resize. It's governed by standards to make sure that it's an equal reading experience. So it's not just sort of a one-off file format that isn't supported by any kind of governing body. The W3C is very involved in governing the standards around EPUB. And while I know sometimes EPUB can be challenging because it's typically not provided as an accommodation, it is definitely becoming the most popular option for accessible course materials. All of the big publishers have a very big accessibility first digital strategy, digital first strategy. So the more you can become comfortable with EPUB, the better. If you have questions about it, if you don't understand how it works or why maybe you can't get an accommodation there, please feel free to reach out to me, and I can connect you with the right people if you need those answers. So what tools can you use to create and validate EPUBs? So one of the big announcements at CSUN this past March, which I know a lot of people weren't able to go, we were there. It was very interesting this year, that's for sure, was that now you can create an EPUB from a Word document. It was, I think, probably it seemed like half the people that were there were in that session because all the other ones were canceled. But it's really a great tool that allows you to create EPUBs, and you can create essentially anything as an EPUB from a Word document. So I encourage you to check that out. And if you have any questions about how that works, we can hook you up with the DAISY people, because they were influential in making sure that Microsoft made this available for just the community at large, really. ACE by DAISY is a tool that you can use. It's free to check the accessibility of EPUB files. So that includes maybe the EPUB file that you created out of Word. Even though it has a bunch of checks and balances along the way, you can run it through ACE by DAISY. Let's say, for instance, you have an EPUB and you're having problems with it, and you don't understand, maybe it isn't as accessible as you think it should be. You can run it through DAISY, and it'll tell you where the barriers are. You can even connect DAISY to a couple of other tools to give you like reports on the accessibility of content, and that's all outlined in the link here. So Calibre, or Calibre, some people say Calibre, I say Calibre, who knows which one's right, is a free open source EPUB manager. So when we have to dig into EPUBs that maybe just aren't processing well for us, and maybe try to find out what's happening, this is what we use. It's been around for about 10 years. It's a pretty well vetted file editor, EPUB editor. So I encourage you to check that out, because it's completely free, and it's a great resource for editing EPUBs. Open Author is a huge OER database that helps you pull things to build your own materials. So the fact that all of their materials are open allows you to avoid those IP and copyright infringement issues. And then if you're really into building instructional materials, web-based instructional materials, Infusion is a JavaScript framework that you can use to create those, and it's specifically geared towards creating instructional materials. So while we use a JavaScript framework called Ember to create all of our digital products for accessibility, Infusion is more geared towards that instruction side of things. So in terms of delivering accessible OER, that's the third step in the process. For us, that's really our content delivery system, because it's built around our e-reader platform. And our accessible platform has been vetted by lots of partners in the accessibility community. We are listed on the epubtest.org site, where DAISY users have tested our reading system and rated it for all different kinds of things. So you can see our scores on that website. We worked closely with DAISY and Benetech on the accessibility metadata display within our products. I know some companies are already doing that, and we are getting ready to actually release that ourselves in a format that's more in line with the way Benetech would like to see it inside of our platform. That's been an interesting journey over the last year or so, for everybody to come together and decide what's really important in accessibility metadata, and also encouraging the publishers to include it in their books so that we can expose that for them. And then the National Federation for the Blind has also reviewed our e-reading platform. And the other thing that they did for us is we do an onboarding, an accessibility 101 for everyone who works at Red Shelf. It's a requirement, because accessibility is everybody's job at Red Shelf. And they went through all of our onboarding materials and assured us that they were accessible for anyone with disabilities who joins Red Shelf. And then, of course, our platform does support, again, the ingestion of OER. And we have a lot of specifically campus created content that we also ingest, again, alongside traditional publisher textbooks quite often. And, we have all the tools in our platform support the highlighting and taking notes, defining unfamiliar words, creating flashcards so you can build study guides. Printing is an option, and text-to-speech is an option. That's probably the most requested feature we have ever had for the e-reader, is text-to-speech. You can generate citations, And then we have different ways of engaging students, giving them the option to look to see how often they're reading their book, how much they're reading their book, so they can get an understanding of, hey, maybe this is why I'm not doing so well. I'm not reading as much as I think. And we also have other ways to add questions to our books as part of our classroom experience. So we're always looking at different ways of making our platform more engaging for students. And then as far as specific accessibility tools, you know, we have really worked hard to create tools that are very useful for all students. And again, that text-to-speech, huge step forward. We're now offering text-to-speech in all of our textbooks. By fall, it will be added to every single textbook. We're in the process of adding it to all of the PDFs right now. And you can control the voice, you control the speed, you know, adjust all kinds of things in terms of the text-to-speech to make it more personal. And then our platform is accessible for screen readers, JAWS, NVDA, voiceover narrator. We have lots of keyboard shortcuts that are specific to whatever operating system that you're on, to enable folks who maybe can't use a mouse to use their keyboard to navigate and use the tools inside of the reader. And another super exciting thing that we just released is personalized view. So that allows you to do visual adjustments inside the book. So dark mode, sepia, changing the font, changing your leading and kerning, you know, the spacing of your words and your lines, as well as the margins, you know, to make it easier for folks with learning disabilities or dyslexia to read our textbooks. You can toggle that on or off, and it's probably, next to text-to-speech, is probably the second most requested thing within the book. We've released sort of not really a beta version of it, but a first release of it, and we have plans for upgrades, so we're definitely going to be iterating on that between now and fall. And one of the big benefits of being a browser-based reading system is that we can be used alongside many like Chrome plugins, and Kurzweil Read the Web is probably the one that we get asked about the most. If you have a Kurzweil login, you can use the Chrome plugin on EPUB books, because it essentially works the best with EPUB books. Some PDFs are okay, but for the most part, we encourage people to use it with EPUB right inside the browser. So just a kind of a few additional resources to sort of tie all of this together. You know, we went through and sort of looked at a lot of the things that some of our partners were using, some recommendations by them of additional links and information we could include in the webinar. And EDUCAUSE has a create an open textbook document that you can read through that sort of guides you on how to actually create OER. There's that Universal Design for Learning framework again, the Inclusive Learning Design Handbook, which is a great resource for people who are creating OER. OER Commons has a public digital library of open educational resources. Again, because their resources are open, you can add them to your open resources and not worry about any copyright issues. Creative Commons, which is really in charge of the Creative Commons licensing of things being open, has a lot of resources to maximize the benefits of your open education materials. And then that Quality Matters Higher Education rubric, there's a little bit more information there on that, those 8 key standards for course design. And then as far as, you know, maybe you want to check out OER that isn't created on your campus. So OpenStax, again, is openly licensed, peer-reviewed college textbooks. Lumen Learning is a company that creates customizable OER courseware. And then the Open Professionals Education Network helps you find openly licensed media elements if you want to use them in your courses. And MIT offers a great resource of open materials covering like almost their entire curriculum, thousands of MIT courses for you to use and reuse, remix, redistribute all yours. So, you know, we're really hoping that your key takeaways today are around that whole idea of accessibility and affordability going hand in hand. The accessibility of OER, it just really mixes the two of those things together. And is just so important, especially right now, just dealing with everybody being virtual and digital. having to try to manage that remotely is very difficult. So just building in that accessibility in the beginning will just really help everyone, students, DSOs, everybody. And really making sure that we're holding OER accountable to the same standards as traditional materials, especially in the affordability realm. The more and more OER gets adopted, the more and more we should be focusing on the accessibility of it. And you're not alone. That whole idea of working together, it's really the best way to ensure that you're adopting the most accessible materials. If it's stovepiped and it's just one, group working on it, it's not going to be as successful as everybody just circling the wagons and working together on it for your students. And as we've demonstrated, there's many tools and resources available to create and validate your OER choices. And if you are creating OER and you have questions, or if you want to know if you're one of our campuses, you want to know if it's going to work in Red Shelf, we're here to support you. So if you have questions, concerns, please be sure to reach out to us. We're more than happy to help. So why don't we take some questions? Let's see what we've got here in the box. If I can get to it. Oh, this is a good point. Librarians are a great resource for OER compilation, remixing, and authoring. That is a very good point, Amy. And it looks like that's all we have for questions. Should we give it one more second? In terms of specific EPUB software to create an EPUB, again, Calibra is a great one, but honestly, start with Word. Check out that Word to EPUB link to learn how to do that and create an EPUB out of Word. I mean, pretty much everybody uses Word. So if you want to try something easy just to sort of get started, I would highly recommend that, because that's such a huge step forward for everybody in terms of creation of EPUBs for sure. Can we get a copy of this presentation? Yep, we will be sending out a link to everyone after we make sure that this is captioned for sharing. We can also send out the deck to everybody too, everybody who's registered. One more second. You are welcome, Jana. Thank you for attending. Okay, well, thanks everybody for attending today and celebrating Global Accessibility Awareness Day with Red Shelf. We really appreciate your participation. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week and a fantastic Memorial Day. Stay safe, everyone.